I'm so happy to see you all here. I'm happy to see lovers of the wilderness join us tonight. We've got a little bit different format than a couple of the Naturalist Night series that you may have attended in the past. I plan to spend about 30-35 minutes on a presentation for you, including a 4-minute video that our wilderness rangers put together last summer. And then we'll go into a question and answer time for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have on this issue that we're going to discuss this evening. But if you would, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. And after the question and answer period, we have questions that we're going to be asking of you. And if you have time before you leave this evening, we would love your feedback. I'm going to introduce now Kay Hopkins. She is overseeing our wilderness program on the White River National Forest, and John Thompson, who oversees the wilderness program on the Aspen-Sopris Ranger District. They're going to help me with this after the presentation in terms of getting a little bit of feedback from you folks, because we would love to hear what you think about all of this and how you feel about possible management changes in the future. So first of all, what is wilderness? The Wilderness Act defines wilderness as an area where it's hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. And as we walk through this slideshow together, I want you guys to understand that there are some constraints that we are under as far as being land managers responsible for congressionally designated wilderness. And that includes these 4 wilderness character qualities. These words that I've bolded on this slide come directly out of the Wilderness Act. And the first one, untrammeled, may seem a little kind of bizarre, kind of a bizarre name, but it essentially means it's an area that's unhindered and free from modern human control or manipulation. Natural, it's protected and managed so as to preserve its natural conditions. Designated wilderness is undeveloped, an area of undeveloped land without permanent improvement or human habitation. And the last one, solitude, and primitive or unconfined recreation. That means that it's the use of traditional tools such as crosscut saws as opposed to chainsaws, or hiking as opposed to mountain biking. And it means personal challenge and personal discovery for those individuals that are in the wilderness, and freedom from constraints of modern culture. These are the wilderness character qualities that by law, we are responsible to manage for in a designated wilderness area. It's not always easy, and as you'll see, we're not succeeding in some of those areas with the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness. This is a very simple map of the Aspen-Sopris Ranger District showing 5 different wilderness areas on our Ranger District, and I feel so privileged to be here. You know, I've only been here for about a year on this Ranger District, and the district I came from in southern Utah didn't have any congressionally designated wilderness. And so for me to be here and see that almost 50% of this wilderness, or 50% of this Ranger District is designated wilderness, is such an honor, and I feel a huge responsibility for us to be able to manage it the way it was meant to be managed. So we've got 5 different areas: Holy Cross Wilderness, Hunter Frying Pan, Collegiate Peaks, Raggeds, and the Maroon Bells-Snowmass Wilderness is by far our biggest wilderness area on this Ranger District. Why is Maroon Bells so special? Why do so many people flock to this area to come to the Maroon Bells-Snowmass Wilderness? It's 183,500 acres. It has 9 passes over 12,000 feet. Those are very high passes, you guys. I mean, you live in Colorado, you might take that for granted. I came from Utah. We've got beautiful mountain country in Utah, but we don't have a lot of passes over 12,000 feet. And we certainly don't have 7 peaks over 4,000 peak. We don't have any peaks that get that high in Utah. And in this one wilderness, this one special area, we have 7 peaks exceeding 14,000 feet in elevation. It also includes the famous 4-pass loop. 26 miles, 4 passes over 12,000 feet, incredible mountain scenery, advertised in almost every outdoor magazine. It gets a lot of attention. Conundrum Hot Springs, a beautiful hot springs that sits at about 11,000 feet. And it's about 8 miles hike in, but well worth the hike. And again, in a lot of outdoor magazines across the country, it's getting a lot of advertisement. And it also includes this amazing hike from Aspen to Crested Butte, right? You hike a very long day from Aspen through the wilderness over to Crested Butte. You spend the night, you have a very nice dinner, a bottle of wine. You get up the next morning, you have a big breakfast. You hike a very long hike back over the pass to Aspen, and you witness at times some of the most beautiful wildflowers in the entire world. So we all know why people visit this area, and it's important not to forget that. So when I showed this slideshow last, my friends encouraged me that I needed to add some pretty pictures. So I've got a few pretty pictures just inserted in here, and I got a lot of facts and a lot of numbers, so the pretty pictures kind of break it up a little bit and help remind us of why we all love this wilderness so much. I believe this is Trail Rider Pass on the 4-pass loop. A little bit of history. Back in 2007, 2008, the Forest Service pulled together a focus group of 13 people, all with various wilderness backgrounds. And they asked this focus group to take a hard look at all 35 wilderness areas in the state of Colorado. And they said, look at these wilderness areas. We're getting a lot of use. We want you to study them and come back with some recommendations for managing them. They spent 2 years doing this. And when they did this, they identified 3 magnet wilderness areas. And that included the Eagle Nest Wilderness, which is also on the White River National Forest. It includes Indian Peaks Wilderness, which is on the Arapahoe Roosevelt. And of course, Maroon Bells-Snowmass was at the top of the list in terms of being a magnet, drawing people to it. So that commission, or that focus group, met for 2 years. They studied, they identified these 3 magnet wilderness areas, and then they came up with a number of tools and recommendations on how we should be better managing these wilderness areas. So part of the point I want to make with this, you guys, is it's been going on for a while. We realize this is a high-use wilderness area, and this is not something new. And a lot of these tools that I've identified here, we have already taken advantage of. And I won't talk about every single one of them here tonight, but I'll mention a couple of them. They suggested better public education and more volunteers. We've done that. We have amazing partners that help us in terms of more volunteers. ACES and the Forest Conservancy have volunteers up at the Maroon Bells scenic area almost on a daily basis throughout the summer. They help us supplement our limited workforce to get the word out and better educate the public that comes to visit up there. Fire restrictions. We instigated fire restrictions several years ago. You can no longer have a campfire above tree line in the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness. Okay. Dog policies, that's another big one. You are required to have a dog on a leash now in the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness area. And in the Conundrum Hot Springs area, you can only go up to a certain milepost before you have to turn around with your dog. You can't have dogs right around Conundrum Hot Springs proper. Managing human waste is another one. We've started a voluntary human waste repository at the trailhead to Conundrum Hot Springs, and we have a kiosk there. We fill it with what we call WAG bags, and they're disposable human waste bags that people can grab on their way up the trail. If they're spending the night, you put your human waste in that bag, and you're just responsible for carrying it out and disposing of it outside the wilderness. We get about 30% of the people taking advantage of that. It's not required. We just ask them to voluntarily do it. Group size limits. Maroon Bells-Snowmass has one of the smallest group size limits in the country in terms of a designated wilderness, 10 people. So your group cannot be any larger than 10 people as you're heading into the wilderness. A lot of tools that we've used over the years based on what this focus group did and came up with these suggestions. The two at the bottom are the only two that we have not instigated yet. Length of stay limits and limited entry permits. More pretty pictures. I believe this is at the top of Buckskin Pass. So overnight visitors. One of the tools that was suggested that we start using was permits, and we did that back in 2007. We started using a permit system at the trailhead, every trailhead going into the wilderness for overnight visitors. So if you're a day use visitor, we don't require a permit, but if you are an overnight visitor to this wilderness area, we do require that you fill the permit out at the trailhead, leave a copy at the trailhead, and keep a copy with you on your backpack throughout your backpacking trip. We've gotten some pretty darn good compliance with this. About 85% of our overnight users fill out the permits, and that's how we're able to keep track of the counts of overnight users over the years. You can see they've gone up about 40% over the last 5 years, and they continue to increase. These are 2013 numbers there showing that we had over 12,000 overnight visitors. We don't have our 2014 numbers compiled completely yet, but we think they're going to come in about the same or higher. One thing to note about this is just a user count. It doesn't take into account the number of nights those visitors might be spending in the wilderness. So if I've got, say, 10 users going on the 4-pass loop, spending 3 nights in the wilderness, we're looking at 30 user days right there. But we're only counting 10 visitors. So something to keep in mind. More pretty pictures. Crater Lake Trail. This trail leads from Maroon Lake at the Maroon Bells Scenic Area, and it goes up about 1.5 miles to a beautiful alpine lake at about 10,000 feet. And it's a relatively easy trail, not too easy, but it gets a lot of use. And it gets a lot of use because we have a lot of folks that take the raft system buses up to the Maroon Bells Scenic Area. And it's been pretty amazing. This graph shows that over a 3-year period, we took a trail counter and we counted the number of people on that trail on the same dates from August through October. And what was surprising to me when I first got here, when I looked at this kind of information, was that our busiest time of year up there is not necessarily July and August. Our busiest time of year is in September, when the colors start to change. And 2 different days in September of 2014, we had over 1,200 visitors on that trail, 1.5 mile trail going up to a beautiful lake at 10,000 feet. Over 1,200 visitors a day. So when we go back and we think about that earlier slide, that sense of solitude, if you want to visit a wilderness and get a sense of solitude, don't go here. You're not going to get it. Other thing to note with this, though, is amazingly enough, we don't get a lot of resource damage with our day users. That trail going up to Crater Lake is a fairly wide trail. It's well maintained. We don't have a lot of problems with people creating sidebar user trails at all, and when they do, we're able to get on top of them pretty fast and close them down. So our day users aren't creating a lot of resource impacts for us. This is Crater Lake. Why wouldn't you want to visit that? The beautiful West Maroon Valley behind it, those big glacially cut valleys, it's just gorgeous. These are some of the violations that our wilderness rangers documented in 2014. Dogs off leash, illegal fires, illegal campfires, 307. This is just in 2014. 72 people were found to have be camping overnight with no permits, and 175 piles of human waste were buried by our wilderness rangers. They weren't able to write citations for all these, so we're not looking at hundreds and hundreds of citations that were written. Unfortunately, not every one of our wilderness rangers is able to write citations. And if that's all they were doing, that's all they would have time for. So what they do is they write up incident reports and just document what's going on so that we can keep track of it throughout the summer and have this data. Trash, garbage. 586 pounds of garbage were hauled out in 2014. Wilderness rangers will walk in and have empty garbage bags, and unlike other backpackers who might be able to lighten their weight with each day as they go on their backpacking trips, these guys, their weight increases a lot every day as they pick up garbage and end up carrying it out after a 3 or 4 day pack trip back in there. 164 pounds out of Conundrum, 106 pounds out of the 4-pass loop. Just enormous numbers here that they're having to carry out. And when they get back to the ranger station at the end of each of these trips, we weigh it, and that's how we track it all. So, human-wildlife conflicts. In August of 2014, we were forced to close down 11 designated dispersed campsites around Crater Lake. Food was not being properly stored. Some people were trying to hang it but weren't being successful with hanging their food. Some people just left food in their tents. Others tried to bury it. Just a lot of misinformation in terms of people knowing what to do with storing their food properly. And we had at least 3 different bears come into the campground at nights, and they were getting into tents, they were grabbing food out of the trees, and they were creating a really serious safety situation. So we closed all the sites down, and we closed them down for the rest of the season. In addition to that, we also wrote a special order, an emergency special order, that required all backpackers in the West Maroon drainage to start using bear-resistant food storage containers. It was an emergency special order. We did it because we wanted folks to be able to still enjoy the route on the 4-pass loop, but we wanted, number 1, to protect our visitors, and number 2, to protect our wildlife. And we were fairly successful with that. It was an emergency order, though, and it was only good until the middle of November. So in order to do a longer-term special order like that, we're going to have to go through a bit of analysis through the NEPA process and do some more public outreach and that. Ultimately, I would like to see bear-resistant canisters throughout the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness. But I would like to see what your feedback on that is too, and maybe we can hear more from you tonight on that. Just a really bad situation, and there's a lot of bears up there, and they will continue to get into food that people are not properly storing. So this is another consequence of high use in a wilderness area. Remember, well, I don't know if we talked about this, that there are some restricted uses in wilderness, and one of those restricted uses is helicopters landing or aircraft of any kind. The other restriction is any kind of motorized vehicle. And we had 21 different rescues in the area last summer that required either a helicopter land in the wilderness or an ATV drive into the wilderness. So, you know, there's these life and death situations where we don't have a lot of choice. We've got to make decisions to get people out and to get them out safely. But I think what happens is most of these incidents aren't happening with climbers who are experienced and seem to know what they're doing. What's happening is day hikers are going in there, and I think they're overly confident, and they're not really quite sure what to expect when they get in there. And it's so easy to cliff out on some of these areas, and you know, they think I'm going to go bag a 14,000-foot peak, and it's not that easy, folks. These are not just simple hikes up. So I think we can do a better job of educating the public there as well. This is just a slide showing our ranger patrols in 2014, and as far as our wilderness-specific crew, we had a very small crew this last summer. I had 2 paid employees and 4 volunteer interns. And I was so impressed with the amount of miles they were able to cover over the summer in such a short time. Obviously, the biggest bulk of their time was in the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness. They covered 743 miles. And then they were able to get out to all 5 wildernesses, and they based the amount of time they spent in each wilderness by the amount of use that's in each wilderness. So obviously, the bulk of that time is going to be in Maroon Bells-Snowmass. So we talked a little bit earlier about managing for solitude. The White River Forest Plan is a document that guides the forest and how to manage the land that we administer. And it also helps us guide how we manage the wilderness. Well, that plan states that if you're in wilderness and you encounter more than 20 groups of people in a day, you will lose your sense of solitude. And in some areas of the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness, we have primitive areas, and those are actually limited to, say, 12 groups of people each day, that you would be able to keep your solitude if you saw less than 12 groups of people a day. Those are guidelines coming from our forest plan. Well, the center column here actually shows that we are well exceeding those guidelines. The trail from Maroon to Snowmass, our wilderness rangers encountered an average of 34 groups a day, and that's groups. Not people. And all of these are exceeding those wilderness guidelines with the exception of the Geneva to Trail Rider Pass Trail. And that is the one that is in a primitive area, and the guidelines in our forest plan say, okay, 12 groups of people a day for that one. And right now they're seeing an average of 9 people and 9 groups a day. This is a climber experiencing a little bit of solitude on top of Lynn Shoemaker Peak. And this is me on the 4-pass loop. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about an experience that I had. My husband and I were so fortunate we were able to hike the 4-pass loop last summer. And 3 of our friends came over from Salt Lake, and we had an amazing time. It was an incredible weekend. It happened to be over Labor Day weekend, so I knew there were going to be a lot of people. And I was glad, because I thought, you know, as a district ranger, I need to see that. I need to see what's going on out there. And I'll tell you, it was such an emotional weekend for me. There were times when I was close to tears because the scenery up there is so stunning. And those of you who have been on the 4-pass loop can appreciate this, I know. But I just want you guys to know how incredibly lucky you are to have this place in your backyards. I I just couldn't believe how stunning it was. The mountains here are so big. And then at the same time, by the end of each day, I was so tired of seeing so many people. It was unbelievable. We would see 30 to 40 groups of people each day. And they may have been the same groups day after day because we were all kind of doing the same loop in the same direction. But you were still seeing 30 to 40 groups of people a day. And I will never forget my friend from Salt Lake. The second evening we were sitting down, eating dinner around our tents, and he just said, you know, you warned me it was going to be busy. You warned me there were a lot of people, but he said, I never thought I would see this many people here. And it stuck with me because he was sad. He was disappointed. And he was affected by that. You know, he came here to have more of a wilderness experience, and he didn't. You know, in the end, when the trip was over and we all walked out to Maroon Lake and finally took off our hiking boots and enjoyed a beer at the truck, we were all happy. We had a fantastic time. It's an unforgettable trip. But I'll just never forget that comment that he made to me. And it was, I think, it was at that moment that it really kind of hit me. Okay, yeah, we got some issues here. We need to continue to work on finding more tools to deal with this. So that was my experience. So in a few minutes, we're going to, hopefully, with any luck, look at this 4-minute video our wilderness crew put together. But before we go there, I just wanted to put this slide up and thank our wilderness partners. We have so many partners in this valley that help us with our wilderness. They help us maintain trails. They help us maintain wilderness character. They help us educate the public. And some of them help us financially. And we just could not do the work we do and be as successful as we are without all of their help. And I know some of you are in the audience tonight, so thank you very much. My obligatory Maroon Bells photo. So, we're going to give this a shot. I'm not sure if this is going to work, you guys. We have a couple of different ways we might be able to show this video. Let's see what happens here. Okay, that's not going to work that way, so let's try it this way. Yep. This is what we spent an hour on before you all got here. Should we try the YouTube site?
Yeah, might as well.
Do we have connection?
It is on YouTube and you can see it yourself.
Yeah, so if this doesn't work, you guys, we'll give you the link. I don't know how the buffering on this is going to work.
It is an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. An area kept in its natural state, unimpaired and undeveloped for the enjoyment of future generations. An area where one can experience great solitude and escape the realms of industrial society. An area that is greatly threatened by increasing visitation and decreasing ethics. The Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness is experiencing a degradation of wilderness character. Elevated amounts of visitation are causing wilderness crowding, leading to significant camping impacts and increased amounts of human waste and trash.
The primary manifestation of increased visitation to the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness is a loss of solitude or crowding. In 2013, over 15,000 visitors descended upon the backcountry, especially the famous Four Pass Loop and crowded Conundrum Hot Springs. this was a 40% increase over 5 years ago. Visitor capacity is consistently exceeded. Parking overflows into adjacent roads and camp impacts grow every year. As an example, on a busy night at Conundrum this summer, there were 42 occupied campsites, holding 51 groups, totaling 161 people. Forest Service standards indicate that solitude is lost when more than 20 groups are encountered in a day.
Significant impacts to the natural environment accumulate when thousands of campers concentrate in fragile alpine areas. The bare ground of 730 inventoried campsites degrades an area larger than 35 football fields. 60% of all campsites are too close to water or trails, further compromising the wild character of the Maroon Bells-Snowmass wilderness. In 2014, rangers naturalized 261 inappropriate fire rings. These fires are destructive because they consume critical organic matter, scar the landscape, and pose a wildfire hazard. Scarcity of dead and down firewood results in rampant cutting of live trees.
Pack it in, pack it out. A simple lesson many visitors disregard to the detriment of our wild lands. Rangers carried over 640 pounds of trash out of the wilderness in 2014. Wildlife contamination and habituation are one of the many negative effects of this careless behavior. Bears habituated to human food by food-soiled trash forced the closure of one of our most popular sites at Crater Lake. Unburied or exposed human waste is also a growing cause of environmental contamination, sanitation, and aesthetic concern. This summer, rangers buried 168 disgusting piles of surface poop.
Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wildness is a necessity. What John Muir observed in 1901 is only more true today. Wilderness areas like the Maroon Bells-Snowmass are some of the last places in the country that provide opportunities for solitude in a natural setting. But excessive use is threatening the very essence of wilderness. In order to preserve these areas for future generations, every user's actions count. Leave no trace, respect the land, and keep wilderness wild.
That video says it a whole lot better than I do, and I'm proud of our wilderness rangers for putting that together. They put their heart into that, and it's getting a pretty good viewing up on YouTube. So. What I've tried to do over the last half hour is give you a sense of a little bit of history and the current conditions on what we're experiencing up in the wilderness. What I'd like to do now is maybe take 10 minutes or so, answer any questions that you have. I might have to ask John and Kay to help me answer some if I don't have the answers for you. And then if you all have time before you leave, we've got 4 questions we'd like to ask of you, and just get your feedback on some sticky note cards, and you can put them up on the flip charts for us. We're not in the middle of any formal process here. We're just sensing and educating and outreaching, and so any feedback you guys can give us will help us determine how we want to move forward in the future with any possible management changes. So. I believe if we're doing questions and answers, we have a microphone that you can ask your question in. So anybody have a question? There's one up here.
Not really a question, more just a comment. I go up to, I live in Glenwood and I go up to the Bells quite often. I think we need to work with RAFTA and get an extended number of weeks that RAFTA runs, especially into the fall. Paying a $10 fee to go in doesn't give you a parking space, and the rangers are out there directing traffic and working with irate people who have to walk 2 miles to get to the lake because there's so many cars up there. So the $10 fee is not a deterrent. It wouldn't matter if it was $20, you'd still have the same problem. But I think if RAFTA ran at least Friday, Saturday, Sundays, all the way through the extended fall season, would definitely help that time of year anyway.
She has a good point. Our rangers at Maroon Bells-Snowmass scenic area, which is not the wilderness area, there's a little bit of a distinction there, but it is the gateway to the wilderness. They spend a lot of their time just parking vehicles. And so if they weren't having to park vehicles, they could probably do a lot more public outreach and education. But yeah.
The other thing was that I worked for RAFTA for a while, and I kept saying, you guys need to run a bus up there early in the morning for the photographers. You know, you go up there and the parking lot is full, and it's because all the photographers are up there. I said, run a bus up there at 7 o'clock and one at 7:30.
Okay.
Hello? You get rid of, bunches of cars, So I think working with RAFTA for extended hours and extended weeks might be a real start.
Thank you. We're meeting with them this winter, so I appreciate that input. Question right here, Roz?
Wondered whether you have any history in any wilderness area in the United States where you have limited the number of groups. If that's already been.
I personally don't have experience, but we do have a few. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area, which is a wilderness area, has limited use permits. And I don't know how long ago they started their permitting system. Do you know, John or Kay?
I believe it was back in the 70s.
Okay, it's been going on for a while, and I think it's one of those things that there's a painful period when you first start for everyone, and I as far as I know, it's quite successful right now. There are several national parks that, whether or not they have wilderness areas inside their national parks, they also have limited use permit systems and have been successful with them. But they're not inexpensive to run. It takes a fee to keep them sustainable. And so, if we were to do something like this, there would likely be a fee associated with it, and that would be something that, users would have to learn to swallow. And I don't know if the users for this wilderness are ready for that. That's part of why we're doing this sensing. Any other examples you guys can think of?
Indian Creek Wilderness up by Boulder has been, Indian Creek Wilderness has been doing it for at least 12 years. They're
That's right.
the first in the state to do it.
That's right. Thanks, Jim.
Three Sisters, Oregon, they have a permit system.
Obsidian Trail.
Yep.
And it's limiting overnight use only, but they're looking now at limiting day use as well.
So Kay was talking about, because she didn't have the microphone on, she's talking about the Three Sisters Wilderness area in Oregon, and they are limiting overnight use, and it sounds like they're currently looking at possibly limiting day use as well. Another question here?
So we all know that the Forest Service doesn't have enough money to do what they need to do already. So because the Maroon Bells is such one of the most highly visited Forest Service sites in the country, is there money from Washington to support this whole effort to maybe bring some more money here because of such issues?
Sarah, I'm so glad you asked that question. I'll pay you later. The fact is, no, there is no money coming from Washington for this effort. And we've already started outreaching to our partners to see how they can help us in terms of education and outreach. And the reality is that a system like this, if we decided to go that way, it's not going to work without a fee. So we won't get any extra money from Washington to further this effort. I can guarantee you that. And you know, it's not just a high use issue. It's an issue of education and ethics as well, because just limiting the use isn't going to stop people from dumping their garbage. It may mean that there's less garbage to pick up, but there's that ethic that we need to work to instill in people to have a sense of stewardship for this wilderness area instead of just a sense of consumption. And I'm not saying everyone is like that, please don't get me wrong, but there's enough people out there that are doing that are making it difficult and really having an impact on the resource. Over here.
I was curious whether you've been able I was curious whether you've been able to collect demographic information on the visitors to find out whether they're local users, whether they're coming from further afield, and what the proportion might be.
John, can you help me with that?
Sure. Our self-registration forms that are at all of our trailheads in Maroon Bells-Snowmass Wilderness, they do have a section for zip code. So for example, the Conundrum Trail in 2013, more than half of the overnight users on the Conundrum Trail were from the Front Range, zip codes in the Front Range area. Less than 5% were Roaring Fork Valley.
How about Fort Pass Loop? Do we have any idea?
I don't. I would imagine it's a little more diverse, both in area and age.
Thanks.
Have people always been such pigs?
Yes.
I'm afraid I don't know how to answer that question. Where are you, Alex? Here's one here, and then I think we've got one in the back. Here, take the microphone, sorry.
Have you got any thoughts on the educational process? Because one of the things that comes right to mind is leaving of trace.
Absolutely.
I don't think, you can't look at that and say, whoa.
I know, you're right on, and I think that's where we can do a better job, and we can have our partners help us do a better job of those leave no trace ethics and principles. I agree, we can do a better job with that.
I don't know. Is a pamphlet that are placed at the trailheads that talked a little bit about the ethic, would that help? And I know there's some cost involved in that, but it might help.
Are the leave no trace principles on our permits?
On the back of the permit, we have the wilderness regs, so all the regulations are there. And I believe we do have some bullet points with leave no trace guidelines.
Yeah. Is the microphone gone? Oh, okay, I think there's a gentleman in the very back that's been really very patient. Let me take his question.
I just had a follow-up on the question about local users versus other users. Are you able to track that over time? I guess I'm curious, is that an influx of other users, or is that locals starting to stay away from places that are so heavily used?
On the Conundrum Trail specifically, I do see a lot of local day users, but the overnight users certainly are from other areas. I did read something in the paper about the county commissioner says he doesn't go to places like the Maroon Bells because he can get the value of that wilderness elsewhere. So maybe the locals are staying away from those high use spots.
Except when their friends come to visit them. Because your friends always want to go up to Maroon Bells. Other questions? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking if you go to a permit system, maybe you could make those people, before they actually get their permit, sit down and watch a 5-minute video of what they need to do out there and how to bury their waste or carry it out or whatever the rules may be, and not give them the permits till they sit there and watch it.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome idea. And if we could do something like that online instead of in person too, that could save us a lot of administrative burden. So there's a lot of ideas out there, a lot of tools that I think we could take advantage of in the future. We have the National Reservation System online that hopefully, if something like this were to take fruition, that permits would be reserved through the National Reservation System, and you wouldn't have to call the Ranger District to do it or come into the Ranger District to do it. It's important to remember that we want to keep our administrative burden as low as possible with this kind of thing, because what's happened with some other limited use systems in the past is they've instigated these limited use systems, and they've created such an administrative burden on just administering the system. They're not able to get more rangers out on the ground with the money because they're just paying for people to administer the permit system. And so I want to try to avoid that as much as possible if that's something we were to move forward with. And maybe if we can do more of it online, that could help. Sarah?
One more quick question. Are we seeing more, the increase, is that including an increase in permittee groups like Outward Bound or guide services versus private users? Can you talk about that difference?
We do have permitted guides that use the Maroon Bells-Snowmass Wilderness. We don't have an increase in those numbers right now, at least not the legal guides. I mean, there's always going to be some guiding out there that we may not be aware of. But we have not been increasing the use of guides in the Maroon Bells-Snowmass Wilderness. So, yeah.
Karen, can you remind me how many rangers you have under you, and what percentage of their time can they spend in the wilderness versus all that administrative stuff you just mentioned?
Well, the wilderness crew is a total, last summer it was a total of 6 people. 2 paid wilderness rangers, and then 4 who were volunteer interns from across from different colleges around the country. So those 6 people spent the majority, I'd say 5 out of those 6 people spent almost all their time, wouldn't you say, John, in the wilderness throughout the summer, and they were working full time. The lead wilderness ranger probably spent, what percent of your time would you say?
60 to 75%.
He probably, 60 to 75% of his time was in the wilderness. The rest of the time was administrative.
So the rest of your staff does non-wilderness?
The rest of my staff generally doesn't get a lot into wilderness unless they're on the trail crew. We had, how many do we have on the trail crew last year? 3? We had 3 people on the trail crew last year, and they work throughout the ranger district on trails, and sometimes they're in wilderness, sometimes they're not. So I don't know what percentage that is. Yeah. Keep in mind we've also got our volunteers from Wilderness Workshop that are going out there. They're out on trails. They are in volunteer Forest Service uniforms, and then they come back and report out to us as well on what they see when they're out hiking those trails. I'm sorry, Forest Conservancy. Sorry, Marcia. Is that you, Seth? No, it's not. Go ahead.
What can we do to get some more money out of Washington where every office has a picture of Maroon Bells in it, whether they know where it is or not? Who do we lobby? Where do we put pressure? We can't keep advertising our best places, and that comes out of Washington too.
Yeah, well, Dorothea, you know how to do this a whole lot better than I do. You go to your Congress people. That's the first people you go to. You talk to, if you have concerns, you talk to your representatives, and you demand that they talk to their cohorts back in Washington. You've got better access to them than I do, I'll tell you what. So we're going to be here for a while, and I hate to keep you guys any longer than we need to, so I want to move this on and see if we can get some feedback from you. John and Kay are going to kind of lead this effort. We have 4 questions we're going to ask you, and I'll let them tell you what those questions are. And then we got a bunch of little sticky notes, and we'd love to get some feedback from you. If you just write an answer on a sticky note and put it up on those flip charts and tell us how you feel about Bye.